Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy, joined in this episode by Carol Murray. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
So glad we've been chatting for so long before I hit record because it's been so long since we saw each other's faces and got
Yep.
to chat. It's been so nice.
Yes.
Um, but this is going to be a little bit of a different episode. This goes in the series that I started, or that I'm starting, where I'm interviewing people who wrote white papers for IPA-USA's 50th anniversary collection of white papers. But I wrote one for this collection, and I'm kind of proud about it and excited about it. So I asked Carol if she would interview me for this episode
Hey.
about this. So if you haven't seen, aren't aware of this collection, it's got so many white papers, so many articles. It's quite lengthy. It's free. I'll put the link in the show notes, but you can also like just Google IPA USA white paper and it pulls it up. Every paper is on a different aspect of play throughout the lifespan, so early childhood through adulthood. But I wrote one about the academic pushdown. So to start, I'm going to read the problem statement at the beginning of the paper as our quote, and then I'm going to let Carol jump in. So it starts with young children in early childhood settings in the United States are experiencing increasing pressure to demonstrate academic achievement at earlier and earlier ages. This phenomenon is often referred to as the academic pushdown. State early learning standards and professional preparation guidelines create programs where children under the age of 5 are being subjected to academic expectations that would be more appropriate for older children. The negative impacts on children demand our attention. So that sets us up for the rest.
Yes, that's so you identified three main issues, and I thought it was great the way you broke this up. One, the loss of play in general. What does that look like? What does that mean? Two, how does that affect the mental health of children? And three is really fascinating. How does this impact adults?
Yeah.
Um, but I was thinking of, you said there's a mythology of that teaching the academic concepts earlier and earlier will solve workforce issues,
Yeah.
societal inequalities, international competition shortfalls. I mean, it's a lot, right? It's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
lot that's piled up on children.
Right.
To me, that feels like crowding kids,
Mhm.
burdening kids.
Yeah.
And
It's the burden of all these adult problems on the shoulders of children who aren't yet in kindergarten even.
right? And I don't know, it makes me really like I've tried to articulate this before, but it makes me really think about how, we kind of have to be careful of always saying early childhood education is the most important,
Hmm.
is the best job, is the most heartfelt job, is the critical beginning, all these
Hmm.
things that we say, which I know that it's true in sentiment, but also like there are many opportunities in the course of our lives. We might have a crummy early childhood and we still could have a wonderful kindergarten, first,
Hmm.
second, third grade teacher. Or maybe things change for us in middle school or high school.
Hmm.
Or maybe, it's not until adulthood that we find our footing. I mean, I hope that every child has a good beginning,
Right.
but also like, are we kind of just like working with that hierarchy? Like that this job is better than another job,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, that whole like this glorification. It's a weird thing because we're glorifying and putting early childhood on a pedestal. And yet, as we do that, we're not honoring children. We're not
Right.
honoring
It's
children.
not the humanity of children that's on the pedestal. It's what can we get from these early years?
Yeah, what can we get?
What can
That's
we get? And I love that you posted on your Illuminating Care social medias something about discomfort about thinking about children are our future because we're all our future.
yeah.
And I sort of I wish I'd had seen that before I finished this paper because I would
Yeah.
have quoted
But it
it
was
in.
the other thing about that, like crowding and that piling on, that burdening, giving so much. on the shoulders of children and their educators.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what do those days look like? Like, what do the days look like when it's this model? You said um childhood is reduced to data points. Child chosen free play disappears. It looks more like elementary school. Days become regimented.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how how are children spending their time in those
Yeah.
days, those programs?
Yeah,
And
I think they're spending their time in really stressful conditions, because they don't have much independent choice. They might be given an opportunity to express a preference between two things the adult has chosen.
Mm,
But just that true, here's the idea I want to follow, or here I just want to sit and not do anything for a while, or I want to stay in this thing that's deeply engaging for a little longer. They don't have that kind of agency. And they're moving. Not only are they interrupted often because it's time for the next thing on the schedule, but within those chunks on the schedule, they're interrupted with teacher questions and quizzing and correction.
mhm.
And um, I think that they spend their days learning, um, internalizing the idea that school is no fun and school is really hard, and learning really early that some kids are better at the system than others, and the ones who are not so skilled at working through the system are stigmatized early. And I think that impacts their self-identity as learners and their approaches to future learning. So I think there's just a lot of stress, and I think we love to talk about trauma and toxic stress and chronic stress as long as we can focus it on home and
Yeah.
say, well, some homes are just really traumatic and stressful. But I think we create systems in early childhood when we try to fit this school model. Um, and we're measuring teachers by how standardized they can get the group to be. I
Yeah.
think we're creating chronic toxic stress in our
Yeah.
programs.
Yeah, it's amazing to think of it that way. I was thinking when you said that, like stealing childhood,
Yeah,
and then I was thinking, well, no one can steal anyone else's childhood, honestly, but their
yeah,
childhood is quizzing, correction,
yeah,
interruption,
yeah.
you know,
And
uh,
with as long as we have this narrative of the academic value of early childhood and this use it or lose it mentality about brain development, which is also a mythology that we fall into, um, we feel like we're doing what's best for children,
yes.
until we really step back. Um, I think a lot of it comes from our desire to be seen as professionals and to
Mhm.
be respected and to be seen as quote unquote real teachers. And to do that, we sort of sold ourselves and said, okay, well, we'll just look like school as much as we can then, if that's what it takes to get some recognition for the value of our work and the importance of our days. Instead of people saying, oh, early childhood is really an important time for all development, but also specifically brain growth and development. What do we need to learn about how that looks in early childhood? I mean, that should be our question. That's where our professionalism comes in, right? Is not, okay, well, I don't want to rock the boat because I'm glad to be in the boat, finally. Um, we should be saying, yeah, it is a really important time, but here's how it's different from what
Yes.
you're imagining, or here's how it's different from an elementary school classroom, or um, here's what a schedule would look like that really meets children where they are during this time. That's where we have professionalism that should be earning us respect.
Yes, because what you're saying in that, and number two, the mental health, it's like you're saying that those things, the quizzing, the interruption, the large groups, the way we equipped and arrange
Hmm.
child's day is what do you say? You're saying it disrupts healthy
Yeah.
of relationships.
Yeah.
So that direct link between those kind of programs and the disruption of relationships, I thought was so powerful because play is the way children
Right.
find each other in relationship
Right.
and find even their educators. Play is the mechanism, the vehicle for building those relationships.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
if there's no play, I think about what Del Ferran said, like
Mhm.
it's just like a lot of large group discussions, or not discussions, large group instruction, right?
Uh-huh.
No discussion, no
Right.
talk, no conversation. That's what she was seeing in those UPKs she was looking at in Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
But that consequence of disrupting relationships,
Yeah.
that's scary.
Yeah, I think about this when I'm talking like to my students um, about moving away from large group. And, if you have to do something adult-led, do it as a small group with, children with similar interests or who are, socially connected already or, similar skill level or whatever. Um, and, their question is always, well, then that just leaves everyone else to run wild while I'm with that small group. How do I do that? Or, um, I don't have time uh to do it that way. And that's because of our fragmented or strict regimented schedule too,
Mhm.
because then we think, oh, 9 to 11 is the only time that we're doing learning.
Yeah.
And I can't when instead if we were curious about play, allowed the play, large blocks of time of with play, started to get our build our own skills at recognizing what developmental value you're seeing them get practice with or concepts that are there. Um, that's where the individualizing can come in that leads to those relationships, right? You can't build a relationship with a whole group and with all the individuals in a whole group at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you've got an expectation that everyone sits in this group and complies, some aren't going to be able to do that, and there's going to be disruption, there's going to be a negative kind of impact on the relationship there and then also a negative impact on the children's relationships with each other as children learn who's the good kid and who's the not good kid.
Mhm.
And uh, it's just it's not as easy to see the individual when you're trying to just move a whole group through a whole day of your plans.
Yeah. It makes me think also like if you don't do play, you can't get good at play, right?
Yes.
Like as educators, like I think
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a play-based program, but we're always having these kind of conversations in our
Mm-hmm.
school. Like the teachers will say, I don't really feel like I'm getting time just sitting on the floor
Mm-hmm.
playing with the kids or really understanding what they're doing with the blocks. And then we'll say, okay, well, maybe, don't put out so much messy art this week
Yeah.
because you keep finding yourself jumping up and we don't have a floater this week. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're jumping up and helping kids wash hands and you're managing so much. So let's try doing play this week without as much messy art. Let's put something more self-supportive over
Mm-hmm.
there. And, you know, what if you tell your co-teacher that your goal this week is just to sit on the floor, right? And really understand what's happening in the block corner so that
Yeah.
they can manage. But we have to develop these strategies
Yeah.
because I also think that's something that's sort of missing from this free play movement is like this is hard work.
Yes.
Like, because I think a lot of the really incredible research, which you've also cited here with Peter Gray
Yeah.
and Elkine, and I mean, a lot of them are talking about child's play from a very pure angle of seeing the child in the backyard or at home, or this like pure play
Yeah.
stuff that happens, what happens to the brain, what happens to autonomy, what happens to agency when children play. But we don't talk enough about how to do that in groups.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Think it is an art, and if we I think that's we swing a lot, right? We go like, oh, it's either academic or play, and then we try to do play, and then it feels like chaos.
Yeah.
And then we go back to academic and call everyone over at the
Yeah.
same time to do the work,
Well,
Peter.
There,
But we have to practice. How do we facilitate play?
yeah,
How do we create this habitat where play
right.
thrives?
And we have to be open and honest with ourselves about our image of the child.
Mhm.
Because so much of that fear that play is just chaotic is our internalized idea that learning only happens if an adult's in charge and if an adult's presenting and children are sponges or whatever. I don't let my students say that anymore.
Good, good.
We have to, and when we get curious about play and start sitting on the floor and seeing it, we can see the competence that
Yeah.
children bring, the
Yes.
skills and the ideas and the knowledge they already have, and how their choices in play can contribute to that, to growth.
Yeah.
And my role then, I'm still noticing, and maybe I'm articulating or I'm maybe narrating to the level, to add a level of vocabulary or whatever, but not interrupting, or just talking to my coworker about what I noticed. Um, and then what else could I add to the environment so that they could keep working on that idea or extend it or experience it differently.
Mhm.
That's where my teacher expertise comes in.
Yeah.
I'm still an active part of it all.
Very active.
And we don't think about that. I've been saying this in a couple of conversations. I've said this in a couple conversations lately, and it's met with mixed responses. But we all have kind of a reflexive cringe when we hear somebody imply that anyone can work with young children. Anyone can do that job. And I've gotten to a point where I've started to think, well, if we're talking about an adult who just sticks to the schedule and leads the activities and excludes the children who aren't, complying or successful and moving through a curriculum, anyone can do that,
Mhm.
right? It's this nuanced understanding of development and understanding of play and permission for play and wondering about play and then supporting it and advocating with others. That's what anyone can't do that. That's harder.
It's so much harder. I think that like the other aspect is that everyone who talks about child development talks about social development
Hmm.
and just like I think that might be the most important part of the like facilitating these beautiful engaging play
Yeah.
environments is like you said the image of the child. So if the children are arguing, being able to lean into that and say, wow, look what they're learning.
Yeah. Look at the practice they're
Look at
getting.
the practice they're getting at negotiating, at compromising. We
Yeah.
talk compromise and collaboration is such
Yeah.
a wonderful part of learning, but the kids have to argue and there
Yep.
have to be tears and there have to it's real stuff, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
if we
You
don't
don't
have
get that from a book about all of our friends at school.
exactly.
Right. You just don't in a
And if
in a
we don't
big
have
group
that
time.
strong like understanding, like a deeper underpinning about how children develop their social skills,
Yeah.
then we are going to find ourselves reflexively saying like, oh, these kids can't get along, these kids don't
Right.
play, I have
Yeah.
to teach them how to share. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, they're
Right.
doing
And
it.
and then it starts to feel hard.
Yes.
But it's stressful. There's a difference between hard work and stressful work, I
Oh, true.
think.
Oh,
Um,
that's
and
a
when we're focused on, I know I'm really proud of that phrase. It just came to me.
well, I like it
When
because
we're
I just had a
focused
teacher sit
on,
in my office. I had a teacher sit in my office. Saying, this is hard.
yeah,
This, and I was thinking to myself, how do I respond to that? But
yeah.
that's perfect because
Well,
it
there
is
you go.
hard. It is
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah. And I think if we're focusing on a system that requires us to always be in control, we're going to have more of that stressful thinking that this is all disrespectful behavior or this is some sort of deficit in the children,
Yes.
when really it's maybe a deficit we need to examine about ourselves.
That takes you to the next
Right.
impact is the adults. This
Yeah.
saying like this push down pressure, academic focus is having a negative impact on adults.
Yeah.
Um, so it says that the practitioners and their expertise have lost legitimacy because of this culture that um, gains power over early care and education.
Uh,
So how they've lost legitimacy, early child.
yeah. Well, I think the idea that we have to look like elementary school classrooms and teachers is essentially saying, oh, we're not good enough as just early childhood experts or developmentalists.
Mhm.
We don't have any power in those roles. The only way we're going to get any power is to adopt someone else's ideas of what our work should be. Um, and this ties into all the conversations we had about quality in that series we did
Yeah, yeah,
about quality. But, I think about the struggle that I have sometimes in meetings or conversations or, grants that come up that the only way to get buy-in is to meet their ideas of what it should look like
yeah,
instead of us being able to assert our own expertise
yeah.
and our own experience and say, yeah, maybe that works for fourth graders. Maybe that works for second graders. I'd suggest it doesn't. Um, but birth to five is very different, and so it's going to look different. We're going to include different things. We're going to have different practices. My, I'll use different parts of my expertise with this age group. Um, and I think that whether it's explicit or internalized, we have a lot of people working with children birth to five right now who feel bad about their jobs because the ideal that's held up to them is something that most children this age are not ready to meet or achieve. And so you feel like you're just in a constant struggle all the time.
Yeah,
And that's the same kind of chronic stress that's impacting the children.
right. It's
It's
like,
it's living in a system that doesn't welcome you,
right.
and feeling like your instincts and knowledge are wrong.
Yes.
Um, that's a really stressful way. No wonder we're all burned out.
So like robbing the child of their autonomy and robbing the teacher of
Yeah,
their, I mean, I
yeah.
think like all the directions you could go if you were sitting there in the block corner watching kids, it's going to be so based on your interpretation. Of course, you have
Hmm.
a body of knowledge,
Sure.
but maybe you're like, wow, I'm really looking at the way these kids are cooperating.
Hmm.
Um, or it's like, oh, I'm really looking at the way these kids are experimenting with height and shape and
Hmm.
size or I mean, there's so many, it's so complex, right?
Right.
Can't bring yourself to that
Hmm.
experience. It's like you said, if you just want to be a technician, then anyone can do it. If there's steps
Right.
to follow to take kids through these,
Right.
but to be
Right.
yourself, to be yourself
Hmm.
and to
Yeah.
bring that knowledge of child development and that will kind of like that negotiated curriculum with
Yeah.
what's happening in front of us.
Yeah.
It's
And
such a
even if you are in a spot where from 9 to 11 you have to look like school, that still leaves you a lot of time in a full day program with young children that you can be more developmentally supportive and responsive and offer, allow, give permission for more play.
yeah,
It's workable. I keep hearing it's not realistic. It's realistic if you believe that should be done, right? It's the people who just stop at, oh, it's not realistic are the ones who need to maybe get a little more curious about.
spend some time sitting on the floor.
Yeah, yes, get on the floor. Yes.
Oh my gosh. So that I was going to jump ahead to this idea that I think is another barrier, but it's that you talked about the subject matter over the child,
Mm.
I mean, you talked about that as you're approaching some strategies,
Uh-huh.
but I think it ties in there, like, and David Elkind, I think, is who you cite
Yeah.
at the subject matter, because I think that's often what is happening, like this lack of legitimacy. It's what are we teaching?
Yeah.
People can't get there, they can't pin it down. They can't, what are you teaching these children?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what is the subject matter? So we keep wanting to go to those categories, math, science, literacy, whatever.
Hmm.
And it's hard for us to see child development
Hmm.
as
Yes.
matter, right?
Right. Right.
Being
And a lot of what we let's say we plan all these activities and we see a change in the child. There's no guarantee that it's because of the activities we planned. It's very likely it's just maturation, right? It's just biological change
Yeah.
and experience. So we love to take the credit for it, but it's not always our credit
No,
to take.
no. And it's like, yeah, it's funny. That brought me back. I remember being in like in a mom and me group when my son was maybe 8 months old and I was home for a little while. And I sat next to a mom and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're coming. My kid has learned so much since we've been coming." And she started telling me how her child has learned to crawl.
Yeah,
Looking at her going, I think your child
definitely wouldn't have happened if you weren't in a formal
without this
setting.
social group, I think they would have learned to crawl.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's parents too. That's another piece of this academic pushdown is the pressure that's on parents from before they're even parents,
yeah.
and the ways everything's marketed as having to be educational, and the competition. I'm a better parent if my child does something earlier than the checklist said they should. Again, that's just parents wanting the best for their children, usually. Always an asterisk by those kinds of things. But um, I dream of the day that center directors everywhere get calls from families that say, um, t tell me about play. Tell me
Yeah.
about how much they play and what kinds of um, opportunities they have, instead of, well, do they learn anything, or how are you getting them ready to read?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I just think that's my utopia.
Yeah. Content is so powerful, like
Yeah.
in especially in the United States, because even when you see like people trying to implement a Reggio approach here,
Hmm.
which there are some places doing it beautifully, but
Yeah.
are a lot of that just really they latch onto Reggio because they get stuck in that content. They see
Yeah.
that project or that
Right.
presentation as okay, now we can talk about what we're learning, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
kids
And
are
fancy labels for the
yes,
adults,
yes,
fancy new names for the
and
adults.
Reggio wouldn't agree with that being
Uh-huh.
Reggio
Right.
would say, hey, it's this dynamic interaction and think
Yeah.
happening while the project is
Yeah.
evolving, but people get so like they it's the concrete that we want
Right.
like
Yeah.
attached to
And
define.
I think there's a balancing act to be
Yeah.
done. And I mean, this is a big part of the book that I'm writing, is the idea that if we want to change people's minds about play, we have to understand what they value, and we have to connect play to that value. And so if their value is school readiness, then we have to be able to say, well, okay, I think play should just be a thing kids get because they're children, but if this is what it takes, I can talk to you about how the blocks are getting them ready for mathematical thinking, and climbing up the slide is getting them ready to write their names, and all that. The
Yeah.
case can be authentically made, um, if that's what it's going to take
Yes.
to change someone's mind. But ultimately, I just want children to play because they're children.
You talk about like some of the reasons, the competition with Russia and the
Yeah.
nation at risk, and no child
Yeah.
left behind. I hate those titles. No child left
Yes.
behind. Race.
Race to the top.
Ugh. Every student succeeds. What does success
Yeah.
mean? All that. But what
Yeah.
really, like, I went and looked up the early school success Dear Colleague letter, which
Hmm.
was this February 2024, which
Yeah.
I had never looked at that before. And
Yeah.
it was glaring. It
Yeah.
was glaring in this like couple pages here of just talking about high quality preschool,
Right.
high quality preschool, saying it over and over again with other words like raising the bar,
Uh-huh.
aligning pre
Aligning with school
aligning
standards. I
K
hate
through
that.
three. It kept saying
Yeah.
aligning K through 3, academic achievement, the
Yeah.
achievement gap. It was just like every other sentence was peppered with these phrases, these
Hmm.
catchphrases. There was never once mentioned play.
Hmm. Yeah.
I, they reference this article to build a sturdy bridge through kindergarten and the early grades. So I looked at that article from last year, and it was all about getting kindergarten right. But I
Yeah.
had never said anything about play. What does it
Right.
look like? So
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the problems with school standards
Yes.
is that now, thanks to Race to the Top, one of Obama's initiatives, every state has to have early childhood standards that align with the school standards, but they don't start at birth and say, okay, what do babies need? And then what do toddlers need? And then go up. They start at what kind of an 18-year-old do we want
Mhm.
graduating? And then we'll just back it up a little bit year by year. And it's
Mhm.
not tied to brain science or development or even really good learning science.
No.
It's very much what do we want to get from children eventually?
Right.
And what kind of a document can we write that feels, it's in a lot of senses it's performative, but it's also very stressful for everyone in the system.
It is so stressful. I mean, just to read that language and think about how policymakers are interpreting that
Yeah.
and how it's handed down to administrators.
Yeah. Well, they're getting sound bites, right? All the people that aren't in the direct line of, in the direct work, they get sound bites and they hear, oh, it's research or oh, there's evidence of. But I think about all the meetings that I'm in where someone says, research shows that a high quality early childhood program gets us, this return on investment. And great if that's true, but nobody's saying, okay, but let's look at the research. What kind of things were they doing with children that
Yeah.
got us this? It wasn't academics.
No.
You think about High Scope or Ypsilanti and the Perry Preschool, all that stuff, and Rebecca Marcon's got a study in there that compared play-based to more adult direct instruction kind of situations and play and caring for the family and social issue, those are the factors that are giving us this return on investment number. It's not um, starting academic school like stuff younger and younger. That's not what's getting us the return on investment.
And to push it further, not only not getting us the return on the investment, but you're making the argument harming. It's
Yes,
harming.
harming. Yeah.
It's causing toxic stress. It's
Yes.
causing disenfranchised
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and do no harm is right there in the
okay.
NACE Code of Ethical Conduct. We'll do no harm. We're not engaging. We're not going to. I can't quote it exactly, but they say we're not going to engage in practices that are harmful, and they list exploitative as one of the practices we'll avoid. But I think this academic pushdown is exploitative.
It
I
is.
think for one thing, people are making a lot of money off curriculum and assessment tools because of this pressure and this focus, but also teachers are using children to measure their own teaching success in this way, um, being forced to. And it's all on the shoulders of kids who haven't even been around for 60 months.
That I mean, those are really good points about how it is exploiting children and educators, and also, like, to that core issue of just l not respecting children's rights, right?
Yeah.
Not 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 allowing children the right to play,
hmm
the
hmm
right to make choices, the right to have autonomy
hmm
in their lives.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And if we look at those schedules that are very defined and time, the time frame is adhered to strictly and we move to the next thing. Um, and then we think about stuff that will help children be successful when they get to elementary school, like being able to focus for a long period of time. Um, we're teaching them to not focus
yes.
by breaking their day into 15 or 20 minutes. And in that 15 and 20 minutes, we're interrupting them constantly. We're teaching them it's not worth it to get deeply focused or engaged because you're just going to have to shift to the next thing.
Again,
And then we wonder why they aren't paying attention in school.
it's that lack of understanding about what kids need. I remember when
hmm
I one of my first director jobs, I had this really beautiful school in Boston. It had this neat sandbox inside. It was like
Mm,
this windowed room with an indoor sandbox.
love it.
And there was a group of boys who were just obsessed with getting buckets of water, going to the bathroom and dumping water. And I had to control, like, okay, that's
Yeah,
enough water today.
right.
Slowly in here. But I remember a parent. complaining and saying like, boys, you've got these boys just hauling sand and water back and forth. They are going to be needing to sit in school. Like you need to
Yeah.
treat them to sit, and trying to explain to her, and she did understand it. This is exactly where boys should be.
Yeah.
It's exactly what these boys
Right.
need to sit. It was she was making it a gender issue
Yes.
that these boys, because it wasn't
Oh.
boys who
Uh-huh.
that the girls were in there like doing more school looking things
Yes.
like they all
Yeah.
do, and the boy
Yes.
she was just making it like, well, you aren't serving boys because
Hmm.
you're letting them do this.
Oh
And
my God.
I was trying, and she did understand it, like this is
Yeah.
hard work. This is the hard work of engagement, of
Uh-huh.
linking ideas together, of cooperating, of using your whole body.
Yeah.
This is how they are.
And building a strong core that's going to be able to support you in school when you do have to sit. Um, I
But
had
again, that
Stacy.
misunderstanding, like you need to start practice sitting to be
Yeah, it's
better.
I keep attributing this to Lisa Murphy, and maybe she's not the one who said it, but I think it was. She said a long time ago, if I knew a famine was coming, I wouldn't start starving children now so they're used to the feeling, right? I'd make sure they're as healthy and nu nourished as I could so that if there is this shortage ahead or whatever, um, they're as ready as they can be for it. And a lot of people don't like it because it compares elementary school to a famine. It's and I will say again, it's not about the individual teachers necessarily, but it's a system that doesn't work for a lot of children and adults.
Well, it is a famine. I mean, most elementary schools are, it is a famine if you want to think about play,
Right. Or moving, yeah.
play and move.
Yeah. But I think I also had Stacy Benj
Mhm.
speak to one of my classes in the
Oh,
fall,
nice.
my child development class about when we were talking about the physical development
Mhm.
parts. I had her join us to talk about how that actually is pre-literacy and all that movement. And she had us, sorry, Stacy, if I'm stealing your activity, but she had us use our non-dominant hand and our feet off the floor and leaning forward, write a sentence that she had on the screen that was unfamiliar to us to make the point about how your whole body is involved. It's not just your fingers that are involved in your brain. It's your whole body involved in processing that language and writing it down. And that was so eye-opening
Love
to
that.
the students. And such a good way of making that connection that the stuff that we devalue or see as not meaningful is so meaningful. And if we
And
need to connect it to that adult goal of literacy, we can. It works.
I remember one of my first college experiences learning about like literacy for early childhood, and the professor just said, she said, talk. It's a talk curriculum.
Hmm.
And that always stuck with me. She's like,
Yeah.
are kids talking? Are they having
Hmm.
conversations? That
Right.
is the number one thing that we want to look for in a
Yeah.
high school.
And
Uh,
hearing
hearing, talking,
adult conversations even.
yeah.
Um, That was one thing I had to change my mind about because I would get so annoyed at and of course I don't want teachers like not involved and disconnected from what's happening and just sitting back and having conversations. But I used to get really annoyed as a center director that they would chit chat and not be on the floor just focused on the children all the time. And then I read Michael Gramling's The Great Disconnect, and uh that's what he talks about is the conversations adults have with each other about casual things are so much richer and more valuable in terms of like vocabulary and comprehending meaning
Yeah.
than the little teacher phrases that we use or the silence that we try to kind of force,
Yeah.
and that's
Like
where the literacy
like
matters.
when you have lunch with kids and they want you to tell about your dog or your
Yeah.
grocery store experience or
Yeah.
your whatever
Yeah.
your own children, it's like
Yeah.
that. They're totally engaged in the
Hmm.
conversation. It's the real stuff. It's
Yeah.
the real talk, the real
Yeah.
narrative.
Yeah.
I was going to move over to this this idea of well, you quoted something from when you're talking about appropriate approaches,
Uh-huh.
the words just pop out, and you're
Mhm.
looking at the American Pediatrics
Yeah.
recommendation, and their words like shift away from direct instruction,
Hmm.
opportunities for playful collaboration, for tinkering, right?
Hmm.
And they're talking about kindergarten
Yeah.
opportunities for tinkering
Yeah.
and play.
Yes.
So, I mean, that those words bring so many rich images about what kindergarten could look like.
Yeah.
In the report published by the Lego Foundation, it's talking about joyful, meaningful, actively engaging, socially interactive,
Hmm.
predictable experiences. Like again,
Hmm.
where are these words in
Yeah.
the national documents, right?
Right.
That give
Yes.
us something to base our practice on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I use this a lot. It's the five characteristics of playful learning is what they call it, and it's connected to the idea that these are the kinds of experiences that are going to contribute to that brain growth that we've heard is so important in these early years. And we can't plan joyful for another child. I
yeah.
can't guess meaningful to a
Mhm.
child for a child. I can kind of observe and offer, but I can't know for sure that something's going to be meaningful. Um, and if I'm stuck in my curriculum, it's going to be hard to allow the experiences to be iterative because we've got to do this and be done and move to the next one
Yeah.
instead of letting them repeat what was valuable and interesting to them. All of those things happen in free play, in children's choices. Um, I used this once in class to have some students evaluate some lesson plans or whatever to find where this might be. And it was interesting. One of the most interesting things to me was that when they read the word meaningful, that it should be uh learning should be meaningful or an activity should be meaningful if a child's going to benefit from it. And their response was, well, it's meaningful to me because it's a curriculum goal. It's meaningful to me because it's one of the standards. It's like, no, this is meaningful to the child. And we can only start to guess what will be meaningful after we've deeply noticed over time what the
Mhm.
children are choosing on their own. Um, and certainly no one, from a national headquarters who just sends out curriculum across the country and every 2-year-old in the country is going to do this thing on this day can't
Yeah.
be meaningful.
And I would say like there are markers that can ground it in meaning that we know every child must experience.
Right. Yeah.
Like eating, like
Yeah.
use the toilet, like resting, like
Right.
play. There are these rituals that are universal
Yeah.
that so I think if we start right there, start in
Hmm.
life that the child is living,
Yeah.
meaning can be embedded. Of course, it's
Right.
the child's meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
How do you say that? Uh,
Iterative?
iterative.
Yeah.
I like that because that makes me think again about like play schemas, right? Like
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
really being able to go
Yeah.
back, knowing your environment. So like
Uh-huh.
makes me think of how important the environment is, knowing that I can go back to that art shelf every day and I can always find the tape there and I
Hmm.
find the scissors there and I can spend how much time I need to spend
Yeah.
taping down this thing that I've been working on the day before, and that there's a basket where I keep the messy work and I can return to
Yeah.
those blocks are always going to be on this shelf. The baby dolls are going to be in like this predictable
Hmm.
environment and this predictable flow
Right.
of the day.
So, like, that's the structure they need, right? That
Hey,
when we say children need structure or benefit from structure, that's what it should mean for us. That there's a predictability and a sense of safety, and they can rely on the space they're in, not that we rigidly follow 20-minute increments that are always controlled by the adult.
and once they know that they can keep returning to those play
Hmm.
experiences, then that ironically it's that repetitive positive opportunity that grounds them in security that allows them to be flexible. Because then,
Yes,
you know,
right. Because they don't have to fight so hard for their own like agency. They're more willing to be, oh yeah, I can stop for a minute if you need me to stop for a minute, or okay, I'll try your thing for a while. Because
otherwise
they're,
we're kind of like we're shutting down their flexibility because when they say, "Hey, I wanted to try this or I wanted to try that,"
uh-huh.
that's not what we're doing.
Nope. Nope.
That's not what
That's a
we're
bad
doing.
idea, child.
Flexibility is not allowed. Those are great. Those are really great points.
Yeah.
Playful, meaningful,
Yeah.
socially interactive, and just and walking into a room where kids are really engaged,
Hmm.
thinking and directing their play is
Hmm.
you can feel it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And think about the times that adults, and I've probably done this, separate children who are having too much fun with their social engagement because it's interrupting the
Mhm.
learning or your plan or whatever. When we should be doing the opposite and noticing who they really choose for each other and allowing them that time. I've been reading again as part of research for my book, I've read a few articles about what children's humor tells us about their brain development.
Oh, nice.
And so often we see children's attempts at humor as being disruptive or not appropriate or whatever. Um, that
It
it's
sure
really
happens with
interesting.
those fours, right? Those
Yes, all the poop jokes come out.
drives all the adults crazy.
Yes, yeah,
And the pee and the penis and everything else.
yes,
They're
poopy
like,
butts.
and like we like again, that's another example of if you have a play practice, then that's another example of a great conversation you have with your colleagues because
Hmm.
we just had that, like we have a couple combinations of kids that are difficult.
Hmm.
And, so we have an opportunity to do some small group pull out in a different area
Mm,
where they can
yeah.
really go a little deeper. And so do we keep those kids that are struggling or we see them struggling, but they kind of are grooving off of each other, right? Do we keep them together in a small group or do we
Uh-huh.
separate
Yeah.
groups?
Yeah.
Like it's really our perspective.
Hmm.
It's going to shape so much. Are we preventing that particular duo of kids from working through this thing?
Hmm.
They need
Yeah.
to, if we, okay, this is getting hard, we're going to do separate groups. But
Yeah.
maybe the small group is valuable and keeping them together for a little
Yeah.
while, see what happens here, see how they
Yeah.
work through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those conversations about how to respond, it's responsiveness, right?
Right. Yes.
I think you've been using developmentally responsiveness and
Yeah.
love the
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Thank
I think developmentally informed and developmentally responsive, like we have to have this kind of foundational idea of what's typical or what we might have as a priority, but then we have to be able to respond to the children who are in front of us out, away from the checklist. And that's really helped me to think more clearly about um, uh, our role
yeah.
and how we use our expertise.
It helps there be more flexibility around developmental appropriateness, which is what we are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and so here's my frustration in aside from developmentally appropriate being sort of having a feel like a gatekeeping to me or like a
Yeah.
commodity that,
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
selling or a point of argument. Um, in college as a student and now as an instructor, I see so many assignments that are like, read this activity and say whether it's developmentally appropriate for a 3-year-old,
Interesting.
which is not even in line with NACE's definition, right? Because their core considerations are, what do we know, paraphrased, what do we typically know about development for this age? What do I know about the specific children who are with me right now? And what do I know about the social and cultural context they come from? So I
Yeah.
can't look at, in fact, I got in an argument as a student who, with an instructor who wanted me to do this. I can't look at just an activity description and tell you whether it's developmentally appropriate. I
No.
can tell you whether it's developmentally informed, maybe, but I don't know if it's responsive till I know the individuals who are with me
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
try and do that activity. Yeah, so it's just all part of my process of trying to, I don't know, I like new language to think differently about
I've
things.
been writing a little bit about responsibility. Like, what is
Mhm.
responsibility?
Hmm.
What is our responsibility? And I like just thinking about the word response.
Yeah, it's
And
right there, baked right in.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not fixed, is it? It's very, and that's the thing about care and play and this sort of work that we're describing. It's not fixed.
Right.
So that response is such an important word.
Hmm.
It can't be prescribed. It's not the
Right.
technician.
Right.
The decisions we have to make.
Hmm.
Um, and so I like your concluding recommendations. We need better definitions of play and learning,
Hmm.
which are developmentally informed, you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. More, we need to see the word play more, and we need a better definition about what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it is really disheartening to see those kind of national documents, professional guidance pieces that ignore it completely or modify it by saying, adult guided play or scaffolded play, or, maybe there's opportunities to do some adult guiding and scaffold all those things. Um, but we all have to be curious about learning more about using language about child chosen free play
Yeah.
and its value and its the child's right.
Yes. Yeah. And then you say that we need more definition around kindergarten readiness.
Yeah.
That's a big one, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I did for my book was I found a document that's a few years old, but it had state by state in a Excel spreadsheet whether that state had adopted a definition of readiness. And if they had, it had the definition in the document too. And some states don't have them, and the ones that have them are wildly different. And even like in my community here, um, there's the early learning standards and the kindergarten standard that says by the end of kindergarten, here are the things children should be able to do. But then also those same skills are on the screening document that schools are using to
For the beginning.
determine kindergarten readiness.
It makes me
Yeah.
crazy.
It makes me crazy too.
That that happened to me when my son entered kindergarten. He's 23 now. But
Yeah.
I remember this right in my little neighborhood school here. The kindergarten teacher handed me a list.
Yeah.
And I said, "What's this?" And she said, "These are the words that he needs to know by the end of kindergarten."
Yeah.
I said, "It's August.
Yeah.
It's August. Why are you giving me these words right now?"
Yes.
I mean, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a informed
Mm-hmm.
educator, and I'm going to push back and say, "No, thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll look at those in May." But my
Yeah.
parents are going to be like, "Oh boy, we got to start practicing the words, right?"
Yes.
And some
Yep.
of these kids are 4 when they enter kindergarten in New York.
Yep. Yep. And there's lip service given to schools being ready, not just children being ready, but schools being ready also. But
Mm,
um that's not where the push is.
no.
That to me is an adult responsibility to make
Yes.
sure the school is ready for
Yes.
whichever children are coming to them. Whether it's the people in the building or the people deciding funding for the school or whatever. But no, we're much more comfortable saying, no, let's just make these 3-year-olds work a little harder.
That's such an interesting example about how push down happens.
Yeah.
'Cause you got that those standards from the end of kindergarten.
Uh-huh.
Now they're
Being used as a screening tool.
spring, which is gonna be the spring before kindergarten.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really absurd.
Yeah.
That is such a clear example because think about those 9, 10, 11, 12 months. What happens in the life of a child,
So much happens.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. We couldn't, when I talk about behavior, I use the example of a child who's not tall enough to reach the drinking fountain. What kind of punishment would you give them? Or what kind of consequence should they have? And everyone's always like, None. You give them a stool." Like,
Yeah.
it's like, no, how could we teach them to be taller?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't. You give them a stool. It's so obvious and things like that, but not. you
Yeah.
know, he
Help
doesn't know all his
process.
letters or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is so powerful is higher education, early childhood education programs should include comprehensive content related to play.
Yeah. Yeah. NACCE's professional preparation guidelines that many teacher preparation college programs are guided by does not include play as value. Does It's so heavy on content and assessment, um, that's it needs to be stated boldly and plainly that um, sometimes we're going to have to be the ones responsible for making sure play is included because those other bodies, who whatever organizations aren't including it.
Mhm.
So we have to be aware of its absence,
Yes.
and we have to be aware of the harm of its absence.
Yes.
And then we have to figure out, well, do I care enough
Yes.
to bring it in?
Yes. I mean, it seems like you could have a degree in play,
Yes.
right?
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
You're
Yes.
writing a book on play, on
Yep.
looking through this one schema. I mean,
Yeah.
this one lens,
Yeah.
a new way to view play, to help us understand play. Um, pe Researchers have spent their lives
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
We don't have many college courses. Might have little sections of
hmm
courses or something.
I had one in my master's program that was specifically about play, and we used Stuart Brown's book, and it was great. But otherwise, I don't remember it being explicitly included. Or if it was more like, well, we're using toys instead of worksheets to teach this concept, and so that's play.
That's how it was for
Um,
mine. It was like,
yeah,
okay, now imagine the difference between seeing the word apple or seeing apple on a worksheet or being able
yeah,
to hold an apple. It's
yeah,
like helping you make that abstract
yes,
connection between movement and tangible
yeah,
opportunity to interact, but not understanding those processes
yeah,
that what is happening to the child's
yeah,
symbolic abilities while they are pretending, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so more, it seems like every early childhood educator needs a class on play, more than one class on play. But
yeah,
I mean, that's basically what we study once we become early childhood educators.
yeah,
We just
yeah,
keep learning by
yeah.
seeing these children and what they do. And that's that other expertise where you say, oh, there are these norms where you say to the parent, yeah, we've seen that a lot with 3-year-olds. Like right now, our 3-year-olds are obsessed with "Are you my friend? Are you my friend? Are you still my friend?" They pop up on their
Right.
rescue. "Hey, Mila, are you my friend?" It's like, isn't it funny when this happens to 3-year-olds? It's
Yeah.
just getting so excited about this concept of being a friend, and they can't
hmm
figure it out, and they're all day long, "You're my friend, you're not my friend."
Yeah.
It's like you start to know that there are these patterns, and you're able
Yeah.
to respond to parents' concerns.
hmm
It's so much more than it's so integrated into child development.
hmm Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Development gets lost in conversations about academics. I mean,
yeah,
there has to be an uprising of people bringing play back into all those conversations.
yes.
Um, and some of them will need more concrete tools than others to be able to do that. Um, so that's what I was hoping this white paper would help with.
Oh, it's a great white paper, and I mean, for me, I think the most shocking thing was pulling up that government
Yeah.
uh, document
Yeah.
and seeing like what are the politicians and stakeholders and policymakers looking at when
Yeah.
they're passing bills. It's like, oh,
Yep. Yep. You know, I don't know. They need to listen to us, right, Carol? They need to tune into you and me, Carol.
so maybe how did you get involved with IPA as an advocate, and how did you become one
Oh,
of the people who was writing a white paper?
um,
And other people get involved?
I think probably through Lisa Murphy. I think probably that's where I got like even found out IPA USA was a thing. Maybe um what might I have read? It was probably Lisa. Um, and then
That's
yeah,
international,
I
international.
International Play Association. I
Mhm.
think they're the so International Play Association is international, as you might assume. And then there was this existing organization called the American Association for the Child's Right to Play.
Oh, right.
And they became the United States chapter
Yeah.
of International Play Association. And they do wonderful porch play chat video interviews that I did a bunch of.
Mhm.
And you can join, so I was a member, and then they just did like a call for members to submit white papers in different categories.
I can't wait to go
Um,
look at the other ones
there's
too.
a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. It's and that's kind of why so we did this episode and then I interviewed which will come out after this one probably. Nope, before this one. Emily Clark and Kisa Marks wrote a white paper about uh equity, which I wish I'd included more in mine, but and play and how play how not letting children play excludes certain children.
Well, in
Um
that government document, it does talk a lot about the disadvantaged child, right?
Yes.
So
And the
because
this is a whole other thing, but the
kids,
disadvantaged child gets even more pushed down
right, right.
because we see them as even more behind.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and just the way our system is set up is very white centric and very sort of white middle class woman centric.
yeah.
And I think that's what you were seeing in your sandbox story, where the women were the people, the parent or whatever was very comfortable with what they saw the girls doing.
Yeah.
But the boys are so different that something must be wrong instead of saying, oh, well, they're a different kind of child.
What an innate
Yeah.
intelligence to know that they need to do this work, right?
Yes. Yeah. 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 So anyway, I'm just hoping to direct lots of people to this white paper collection by doing these episodes.
Thank you for your advocacy, and I
Yeah.
love the paper.
Thanks for doing this, Carol. Clearly I could have gone on and on and on, but we
Too.
probably should wrap it up.
So good.
You moved us through it very skillfully. Thank you.
Hey.
And thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Come back again next week for a new one. We'll see you later.